Good Thursday morning, everyone, and welcome into today's daily Bible reading for March the 2nd. Ides of March. Is that what today is? I think something like that. Actually, I know what today is. Today is Gabriel's birthday. So happy birthday to the nephew Gabriel. I promise I just happen to remember some people's birthdays over others. I really ought to put a couple of notes on my calendar right above my screen that way I can see whose birthday it is. I know we have a few birthdays here in March. I'll try to do my best to give shout outs to those who have birthdays coming up so we can all celebrate with them and be thankful to God for them and for the blessings that they are in our lives and that they've experienced another trip around the sun. I'm so glad that you tuned in today on this on this Thursday, as we are reading together in Exodus chapter 21 and Exodus chapter 22. We're going to take a quick step back and focus for just a few moments here after we read through the text in chapter 20, the end of chapter 20. There's some instructions I did not give much attention to because they really fit more with what's going on here in chapter 21 probably. So let me go and get the text up on the screen for us so we can read along together today. Again, I appreciate you taking the time to read along with me in God's word. I know that there are going to be some sections that we read together from in the Pentateuch, in Exodus, especially in Leviticus, where it's just giving of various laws and instructions. But I do want to make these I do want to make us familiar with these by reading them together. And more than likely, they're probably portions of the text that we're least familiar with in all of Scripture. I probably feel confident saying that these very specific instructions in the law concerning various elements of life or worship to God, probably least familiar with those, along probably with Song of Solomon too. But we want to do our best to familiarize ourselves with all the Scripture, and this is certainly a good portion to familiarize ourselves with, because it does not just teach us concerning what life was like for the Israelites, but really these instructions were given with the purpose of really revealing something to us about God, what it is that he values and what it is that he is most concerned with. I think that we're going to see that here in Exodus 21 and 22 today. Again, thanks for taking the time to read along with me. Let me begin reading, though, in chapter 20. I'm going to back up to verse 22 of Exodus 20 and verse 22, because this really begins, I believe, the next speech and the next round of law giving that we see from the Lord to Moses and the people here in the course of giving the law. So reading together here in Exodus chapter 20 and verse number 22. Then Yahweh told Moses, "This is what you are to say to the Israelites. You have seen that I have spoken to you from heaven. Do not make gods of silver to rival me. Do not make gods of gold for yourselves. Make an earthen altar for me, and sacrifice on it your burnt offerings and fellowship offerings, your flocks and herds. I will come to you and bless you in every place where I cause my name to be remembered. If you make a stone altar for me, do not build it out of cut stones. If you use your chisel on it, you will defile it. Do not go up on my altar. Do not go up to my altar on steps, so that your nakedness is not exposed on it. These are the ordinances, chapter 21 and verse number 1, that you are to set before them. When you buy a Hebrew slave, he is to serve for 6 years. Then in the 7th, he is to leave as a free man without paying anything. If he arrives alone, he is to leave alone. If he arrives with a wife, his wife is to leave with him. If his master gives him a wife and she bears him sons or daughters, the wife and her children belong to her master, and the man must leave alone. But if the slave declares, I love my master, my wife, and my children, I do not want to leave as a free man, his master is to bring him to the judges, and then bring him to the door or doorpost. And I'll also add verse 6, that his masters bring him to the judges. That could also be translated, bring him to Yahweh, bring him to God. That is the word Elohim, which almost always, and I tend to almost always understand that word to be supernatural in nature, referring to God or some sort of supernatural being. There is this weird thing in this section in chapters 21 and 22 where they render it as judges. I guess you can render it that, recognizing that they represent God in making the decisions on these cases. So just keep that in mind whenever you see them bringing before judges. It could be referencing people, but these people are representing God and the decisions that he would make in these particular instances. So be that as it may, verse number 6, sorry for the little bitty interlude there, but verse number 6, actually going back up to verse number 7 again. If the slave declares, remember he's supposed to be allowed to leave after 6 years at the beginning of the 7th year, which is the year of Jubilee. We're going to see that later on. If the slave declares, I love my wife, my master, my children, I do not want to leave as a free man, his master is to bring him to the judges and then bring him to the door or doorpost. His master will pierce his ear with an awl, and he will serve his master for life. When a man sells his daughter as a concubine, he is not to leave as the male slaves do. If she is displeasing to her master, who chose her for himself, then he must let her be redeemed. He has no right to sell her to foreigners because he has acted treacherously toward her. Or if he chooses her for his son, he must deal with her according to the customary treatment of daughters. If he takes an additional wife, he must not reduce the food, clothing, or marital rights of the first wife. And if he does not do these things for her, she may leave free of charge without any payments. Whoever strikes a person so that he dies must be put to death. But if he did not intend any harm, and yet God allowed it to happen, I will appoint a place for you where he may flee. If a person schemes and willfully acts against his neighbor to murder him, you must take him from my altar to be put to death. Whoever strikes his father or his mother must be put to death. Whoever kidnaps a person must be put to death, whether he sells him or the person is found in his possession. Whoever curses his father or mother must be put to death. Whenever men quarrel, and one strikes the other with a stone or his fist, and the injured man does not die but is confined to bed, if he can later get up and walk around outside leaning on his staff, then the one who struck him will be exempt from punishment. Nevertheless, he must pay for his lost work time and provide for his complete recovery. When a man strikes his male or female slave with a rod, and the slave dies under his abuse, the owner must be punished. However, if the slave can stand up after a day or two, the owner should not be punished because he is his owner's property. When men get in a fight and hit a pregnant woman so that her children are born prematurely, but there is no injury, the one who hit her must be fined as the woman's husband demands from him, and he must pay according to judicial assessment. If there is an injury, then you must give him life for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot, burn for burn, bruise for bruise, wound for wound. When a man strikes the eye of his male or female slave and destroys it, he must let the slave go free in compensation for his eye. If he knocks out the tooth of his male or female slave, he must let the slave go free in compensation for his tooth. When an ox gores a man or a woman to death, the ox must be stoned, and its meat may not be eaten, but the ox's owner is innocent. However, if the ox was in the habit of goring, and its owner has been warned, yet does not restrain it, and it kills a man or a woman, the ox must be stoned, and its owner must also be put to death. If instead a ransom is demanded of him, he may pay a redemption price for his life in the full amount demanded from him. If it gores a son or a daughter, he is to be dealt with according to the same law. If the ox gores a male or female slave, he must give 30 shekels of silver to the slave's master, and the ox must be stoned. When a man uncovers a pit or digs a pit and does not cover it, and an ox or a donkey falls into it, the owner of the pit must give compensation. He must pay to its owner, but the dead animal will become his. When a man's ox injures his neighbor's ox and it dies, they must sell the live ox and divide its proceeds. They must also divide the dead animal. If, however, it is known that the ox was in the habit of goring, yet its owner has not restrained it, he must compensate fully, ox for ox, and dead animal, and the dead animal will become his. Chapter 22 of Exodus, when a man steals an ox or a sheep and butchers it or sells it, he must repay 5 cattle for the ox or 4 sheep for the sheep. If a thief is caught in the act of breaking in and he is beaten to death, no one is guilty of bloodshed. But if this happens after sunrise, the homeowner is guilty of bloodshed. A thief must make full restitution. If he is unable, he is to be sold because of his theft. If what was stolen, whether ox, donkey, or sheep, is actually found alive in his possession, he must repay double. When a man lets a field or vineyard be grazed in, and then allows his animals to go and graze in someone else's field, he must repay with the best of his own field or vineyard. When a fire gets out of control, spreads to thorn bushes, and consumes stacks of cut grain, standing grain, or a field, the one who started the fire must make full restitution for what was burned. When a man gives his neighborhood valuables or goods to keep, but they are stolen from that person's house, let me start over there, verse number 7. When a man gives his neighbor valuables or goods to keep, but they are stolen from that person's house, the thief, if caught, must repay double. If the thief is not caught, the owner of the house must present himself to the judges to determine whether or not he has taken his neighbor's property. In any case of wrongdoing involving an oxen, a donkey, a sheep, a garment, or anything else lost, and someone claims, "That's mine," the case between the two parties is to come before the judges, and one of the judges, the judges condemn, must repay double to his neighbor. When a man gives his neighbor a donkey, an ox, a sheep, or any other animal to care for, but it dies, is injured, or is stolen while no one is watching, there must be an oath before the Lord, before Yahweh, between the two of them to determine whether or not he has taken his neighbor's property. Its owner must accept the oath, and the other man does not have to make restitution. But if in fact the animal was stolen from his custody, he must make restitution to its owner. If it was actually torn apart by a wild animal, he is to bring it as evidence. He does not have to make restitution for the torn carcass. When a man borrows an animal from his neighbor and it is injured or dies while its owner is not there with it, the man must make full restitution. If its owner is there with it, the man does not have to make restitution. If it was rented, the loss is covered by its rental price. If a man seduces a virgin who is not engaged and he sleeps with her, he must certainly pay the bridal price for her to be his wife. If her father absolutely refuses to give her to him, he must pay an amount in silver equal to the bridal price for virgins. Do not allow a sorceress to live. Whoever has sexual intercourse with an animal must be put to death. Whoever sacrifices to any gods except Yahweh alone is be set apart for destruction. You must not exploit a resident alien or oppress him, since you were resident aliens in the land of Egypt. You must not mistreat any widow or fatherless child. If you do mistreat them, they will no doubt cry to me, and I will certainly hear their cry. My anger will burn, and I will kill you with a sword. Then your wives will be widows, and your children fatherless. If you lend silver to my people, to the poor person among you, you must not be like a creditor to him. You must not charge him interest. If you ever take your neighbor's cloak as collateral, return it to him before sunset, for it is his only covering. It is his clothing for his body. What will he sleep in? And if he cries out to me, I will listen, because I am gracious. You must not blaspheme God or curse a leader from among your people. You must not hold back offerings from your harvest or your vats. Give me the firstborn of your sons. Do the same with your cattle and your flock. Let them stay with their mothers for 7 days, but on the 8th day you are to give them to me. Be my holy people. You must not eat the meat of a mauled animal found in the field. Throw it to the dogs. And that is Exodus chapter 20, actually, verse 22 through the end of Exodus chapter 22. All right, so instead of just working through this text and noting and kind of talking about it section by section, I just want to kind of hit the highlights and summarize what we see here within this text for today. And I think it really gets down to two things. It really gets down to two things with all these different commands and the various issues that are addressed within these commands. It gets down to this, that God is concerned for his name. Number one, you need to make sure that you are followers and worshipers and honorers of God alone, which the altar stipulations actually the first thing is in verse 22 and 23 of chapter 20. It gets back to the first and second commands of not having anybody, no other gods before me, not making any graven images, not making any sort of tangible idols. And then secondly, 24 on, it talks about altars. It seems to be that these instructions are given to make a distinction between altars that are used to honor Yahweh and altars that were used to honor pagan gods. That seems to be the distinction, and that would fit in with the overall theme of this text, where God is very much concerned for his name and making sure that his name is honored. But it's not just that. That particular issue is covered, I think, most explicitly in verses 18, 19, and 20, and then the end of chapter 22. That's chapter 22, verses 18 through 20, and then also chapter 22, verses 28 through 31. Specifically in 18, 19, and 20, it deals with sorcery, it deals with bestiality, and also deals with paganism. Each of these are punishable by death. Why? Why are they punishable by death? Well, it's because these things are associated with paganism. Being a sorcerer or sorceress would be calling on some sort of force other than Yahweh. Bestiality was often a religious practice of the pagans. And of course, offering sacrifices to any other gods would leave them in the same camp as the Canaanite cities that they would be going up against. The same language for those to be set apart for destruction, that's the same language used against Canaanite cities, such as Jericho and such, that they were going to fight against. And then in 20 through 31 of chapter 22, again, you should not blaspheme God or any of the leaders, because they represent God to you. Therefore, if you curse them, you're basically cursing God. Secondly, the best belongs to Yahweh. You need to make sure you give that to him. That includes of your harvest or of your sons or your livestock. And then finally, in verse 31, it's an echo of chapter 19 and verse 6, which is, you are to be a holy people. A holy people. You must not eat the meat of mauled animal. That might get back again to paganistic practices, eating meat in the blood and stuff of that nature. So that's the first emphasis of this text, that if you cross God, if you dishonor him purposefully, then that will cost you your life. There's nothing more sacred than this. But then secondly, within this text, there's also a strong emphasis on harming those who bear his name. And whenever this is either purposefully done or it's done through carelessness. If you go through and you consider which of these instructions would result in death, it's all about whenever you harm someone else. Whenever you're purposeful in harming someone else, or whenever there's carelessness that leads to harming someone else, those type of things would result in capital crimes. But not only that, also those who bear his image, which ties in with the non-Israelites, which can be seen in chapter 22 and verse 21. You must not exploit a resident alien or oppress him. Why not? Well, number one, because he bears his image, they bear my image. But number two, because you know exactly what this is like, because you lived in Egypt in this type of environment. You lived in Egypt as those who were resident aliens. So it's expected for you then to behave in a way that you would appreciate being treated. And the whole golden rule, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. You did not like it whenever you were oppressed in Egypt, so do not oppress others in the same way. Especially those who are of vulnerable status, whether that be widows that are mentioned, orphans who are mentioned. If you do this, I will hear their cry, and you will basically receive the same fate as the Egyptians. So pay very close attention to that. All of these, this subject matter, again, offenses against God, offenses against his people, offenses against those who bear his image, these things result in death or very, very severe consequences. Now, what results in lesser consequences? Well, things that are accidental, they're truly deemed as accidents, but also property, because property can be replaced. Property only has a monetary value, not an intrinsic value, such as people do. So that would really be the really brief synopsis of what's going on here within this particular text of Exodus 21 and 22, and those few verses of chapter 20. If there's anything that is mentioned here that you would like to discuss in more specific detail, please feel free to leave me a comment in the comment section below, whether you are on Facebook or YouTube, and I would love to discuss that with you. Or you could shoot me a text, of course, and we can talk about it there as well. I'd like to dive in and talk about this more in detail if you so desire. I'm more than happy to do that. So again, if you have any specific questions about any of these things, please feel free to let me know, drop a comment in the comment section, and we'll talk about those some more and get into some greater detail. So tomorrow we're going to be reading in Exodus 23, which is going to talk about laws about honesty and justice. It's going to talk about Sabbaths and festivals, promises and warnings. A lot of good stuff here for us to look at as well, to dive into and to discuss a bit tomorrow. Hope you can tune in then. Thanks so much for tuning in on this Thursday, everyone. Take care. God bless.